All right, hello everybody. We are starting into a 3 lecture series here on differentiating learning. And just so that you know, I'm just going to bring up your assignment 2 here. These are going to be the lectures that are the basis for your assignment 2, either differentiation e-portfolio assignment. So just keep this on the radar. I believe it is due, just look at my course outline here, November 5th. So that's coming up sooner than later. So as we go through these, be thinking about jotting down ideas, taking in websites, references, things like that, and be thinking about finding your own 3 to 5 links and resources so that you can work on this e-portfolio in a gradual manner rather than slamming it out the night before. Okay, so that's just an FYI. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are going to start with intellectual abilities and challenges, but let's sort of jump into what is differentiation. So when we talk about differentiated learning and differentiation, these are the 2 foundational ideas around differentiation. So basically, you need to know your individual students, you need to know their intellectual abilities, you need to know behavioral issues, mental health issues, if they're gifted and talented, and you need to know if your student is a child in care. So we're going to look at the bold today, intellectual issues. We'll look at the italicized ones next lecture, and then children in care will be our 3rd lecture in this series. And the other main component of differentiation is then once you know your students, is you try your best to create a positive journey and learning environment for him or her. Okay, so that's ultimately the foundational thought behind differentiation. Okay, so what I want you to do is just to kind of get you thinking about your own sense of self as a student. I want you on a piece of paper, maybe paper would have been nice to put in there. So how about on a piece of paper, draw a picture of yourself. So it can be a stick person, it can be an elaborate drawing, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then I want you to write or draw beside your self-portrait what you do to show your above average intelligence, because you are here, you have above average intelligence. So things like good grades, you're able to understand from hearing information just once, your product is creative. And I want you to add to this as we go through this lecture. So just kind of have it sitting there and just add to it and add actual terms, add actual theorists as you go. When you go, oh, that's me, that's a description of me, and then be ready to share it in Collaborate. Okay, so since one of the main ideas around differentiation is intelligence, we need to kind of have an idea of what is intelligence. So basically, the definition of intelligence is difficult to really pinpoint, as some want to include like musical intelligences, while other thinkers like Vygotsky would include the ability to use tools of the culture with help from more skilled individuals. It's a very abstract and broad term. So, but however, most theorists, most thinkers would say that these 4 attributes are a part of almost everybody's definition of intelligence. Not everybody, but most. Is that there is an ability to learn from experience, that we have verbal ability so that we can actually talk and communicate in a verbal manner. We have the ability to problem solve, and we have the ability to adapt to one's environment. And that's a huge human attribute, right? Is that we can actually adapt. Unfortunately, intelligence cannot be directly measured. I wouldn't suggest that you chop off a student's head and peer inside to see what is going on in there. Probably not ethically correct, and might land you some jail time. So probably don't do that. So what we have to do is we can only evaluate students' intelligence by through indirectly studying their intelligent acts. Right? And we have to rely on usually written or oral tests to show intelligence. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you three theories around intelligence, and there's lots of different ideas and there's lots of different debate, but these are probably the three that you as ed students, again, should be able to party talk. When you talk about intelligence, you should be able to bring these theorists in. So the first one is Carroll. And this is John Carroll's hierarchical model of intelligence. And he was born in 1916 and he died in 2003. And he was an American educational psychologist. And Carroll's view of intelligence is still kind of viewed as one of the best ways to represent the structure of cognitive ability, even in the 21st century. So it still has a lot of merit. He calls this general intelligence. Okay, so general intelligence is here, and it's just, if you see this in an article and you see a little G, that means general intelligence. Okay, so it's reliant on these eight secondary abilities. The main ones I've circled here are fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, and broad visual perception. Those are kind of the big kahunas of his hierarchical model. And again, there's great controversy out there in intelligence land about how to design a model that represents the structure of cognitive ability. But this is his model. Okay, so let's have a look. So here's John in all his glory. And again, here are his three main intellectual abilities that he would say are the main ones from his theory. So fluid intelligence, or capital GF, you might see that sometimes in an article, this is your use of reasoning for problem solving, particularly to solve new or unusual problems. So that's what fluid intelligence is. It's the ability to identify relationships between different concepts and to be able to draw logical conclusions. And this is what's sort of deemed as the natural cognitive ability. So kind of what we come into the world with. And it also is linked with abstract problem solving. And some theorists say that we have a fixed amount of fluid intelligence, which would kind of make sense. What we come into the world with is fixed, which we can choose to invest or apply to specific crystallized intelligence acts. Okay, so this is sort of our nature. This is kind of what we come in to the world with. Crystallized intelligence is associated with learned or cultured knowledge. So it's kind of what you're doing now. This is your learned knowledge. It's a result of learning and knowledge acquired over one's lifetime. And some people say that fluid intelligence causes crystallized intelligence. Okay, so that's sort of one of the ideas that's out there. So you can actually say to your prof, I'm actually saving my fluid intelligence for a different course because I have only so much fluid intelligence and I'm not expending it on your course. See what happens. You might get a funny response. Anyways, visual spatial reasoning. This is the use of simulated mental imagery to solve problems. So it's kind of the mind's eye. So I direct musical theater shows, and I can see in my head, I can see the whole scene, like where all the actors are and where things are in my mind's eye. Or an engineer might be able to see the whole bridge in his or her mind's eye before writing it down. So that's what visual spatial reasoning is in there. Okay, so that's a quick romp through Carroll's idea of intelligence. We also have Howard Gardner. Now, you have probably at some point come across Howard Gardner's ideas. He was born in 1943 and he most recently taught at Harvard University as a developmental psychologist. And he questions whether intelligence is a single entity or whether it can be measured through such tests as pen and paper or IQ or standardized tests. So he's saying it's not a single entity. Intelligence is definitely not a single entity. And he put forth that there are 9 intelligences. So that's what this little picture is here. So these 9. So this is what he would say is his theory of multiple intelligences. So he has verbal, mathematical, musical, visual, spatial, kinesthetic, interpersonal, naturalist, where you learn through categorization, and existential, those big picture kind of people in there. The problem with this theory is it's sort of losing vogue as an actual intelligence theory. We still refer to it when we introduce lesson planning to you in this program. We still refer to it as possible ways to have variety in your lesson plan, but we don't refer to it anymore as an actual intelligence theory about how this is actually how students learn. So Howard Gardner would say that these are definitely separate structures, that math and music and visual spatial are different structures of intelligence, that there are varying types of intelligences, that each student has a unique cognitive profile. So again, a little bit of that nature. And however, there is much criticism on this. So I'm going to read you a little bit from Scientific America, and this is about you probably did this at some point in your schooling career. You probably were assessed as a visual learner, as a kinesthetic learner, as as you learned better when there was music, or you put the content to music. And what they're saying now is, and so this is, I'm going to read you this little article. Despite knowing their own self-reported learning preferences, nearly 70% of students failed to employ study techniques that supported those preferences. Most visual learners did not rely heavily on visual strategies, nor did most writing learners rely predominantly on reading strategies. Given the prevailing belief that learning styles matter and the fact many students blame poor academic performance on the lack of a match between their learning style and teachers' instructional methods, one might expect students to rely on techniques that support their personal learning preferences when working on their own. Perhaps the best students do. Nearly a third of the students in the study did choose strategies that were consistent with their reported learning style. Did that pay off? In a word, no. Students who study strategies aligned with their test scores performed no better in either the lecture or lab component of the course. So again, you'll hear us talking about this, but not necessarily as a theory of intelligence anymore. Okay. From your reading, we're going to have a little bit of a talk about Howard Gardner's theory of intelligence, because again, I think you want to know where it stands. And so be ready from the reading for this week to share the benefits and possibly the criticisms surrounding Howard Gardner's theory. Okay, and one final intelligence theory. This is Sternberg, and where Gardner focused on specific and separate areas of intelligence, Robert Sternberg focuses on how these intelligence factors actually work together. He talks about that it is an interdependent process, and that these three sub-theories, so analytical, creative, and practical, it's actually the intelligence is how they actually work together, how they are interdependent instead of independent. And he focused on, hang on here, sorry. I'm going to just take over here. He focused on improving overall performance in all three areas, and that is actually what improving intelligence is. So, analytical component is involved in the interrelated basic thinking process that drives intellectual behavior. So these are your higher order executive processes and your knowledge acquisition components. The creative side involves various thinking mechanisms that people use to cope with new experiences. So they're marked by novel approaches. So what you would pretty much expect in under a creative subtheory in intelligence. And practical. It involves understanding one's self well enough to choose and live and work in environments or contexts that provide the highest probability of success. Okay, so this is actually putting it into use and actually setting yourself up to be in an environment where you actually really get to show your intelligence and the interplay between the 3 intelligence. Okay. Excuse me. He notes on many occasions that, and in a lot of his writing, that what most IQ tests and standardized tests measure is only the analytical component of intelligence. That those kind of standardized tests where you fill in the bubble don't actually look at, don't actually take into account all 3. And for him, that's kind of ridiculous, because intelligence for him absolutely is the interplay between these. He contends that what makes the difference in determining if one is smart depends on how different people use and balance their mental aptitudes. So how are they using analytical, creative, practical, and how are they actually balancing those out? And his model leads to assessment of how intelligence is used, directed, or exploited. 2 individuals of equal intelligence, so that nature, might use or combine meta components quite differently. It then might be the recombination, use, or directed application of meta components that could make one seem more intelligent or more successful than the other in tackling certain tasks. So you might have somebody who is very analytical, but cannot bring in the practical or the creative. We've probably all had professors or teachers who are brilliant in their analytical skills, but they cannot, they're not very good teachers because they cannot bring in the creative or the practical side. Okay. And ultimately, there's little criticism of Sternberg's theory right now, as of right now. Who knows? Theories are always evolving and changing and morphing, and so but right now there's this is kind of Sternberg is on top, Carroll is kind of right here, and Howard Gardner, unfortunately, is down here in reputation around theories of intelligence. Okay, so let's go on into the source of intelligence. Is the source nature or nurture? Okay, so again, I think most theorists would say it's a combination of nature, what you're born with, and nurture, what you learn from the environment, from school, from your parents, that kind of thing. And you can talk about intelligence as a bookshelf. So you're born with the structure. You're born with the number of shelves, but what you actually put on the shelves and in what order comes from the environment. Okay, so what actually goes on the shelf, the structure is nature, the structure is what you're born with. The size is what you're born with, but what you actually put on the shelf is your environment. I like that analogy. Okay. What happens when you have a bookshelf like this? You come into the world, your nature is this bookshelf, or this one, or this one. What happens when your nurture is this, where you have nothing to put on the bookshelf, or where there's spaces, or where the information is hanging tenuously? Do we have kids in our class that have bookshelves like this? Absolutely. Do we have kids in our class who have bookshelves like this? Absolutely. That's where the differentiation comes in. That's where we have to try to figure out where are they at in nature and nurture, and how do I deal with kids with bookshelves like this, and how do I deal with bookshelves like this? Okay, I'm going to end it there. I think this is a nice little summation of intelligence. We're going to continue on with looking at specific concepts of the kids in our classrooms in the next lecture.